And don't you have some stories about Gran as a bartender and a bar manager?
Well, first, I want to go back to when she was a younger woman. So what do you know about her? You told some stories when she was a child. How about when she was, say, a teenager? I think she trained to be a nurse. And how much school did she get?
She went to a good school. She was in a boarding school, convent, was always in trouble. She wet her bed till she was 13, and she had some horrible stories about a nun coming into the classroom. Oh, and her mother did what my mother also later did. She tried to improve on the school uniform. My mother did this too. So my mother's uniform was always a little different, a little better than everybody else's, which is terribly embarrassing, as I can tell you firsthand. And she, instead of having a plain green dress, she had one with spots on. And the nun came in the classroom and said, "Tell that spotted girl to come here. She's wet her bed again." I mean, awful thing to do. So my mother was a terrible rebel at school. She was all in trouble. She had a story about putting something, there was a skip basket, which is like a big basket hamper that they used to put laundry in. And she put one girl in it, and it has a peg that closes it, and this girl was trapped in the skip basket. And she rolled her. Oh, she rolled her in the skip basket, that's right. You know, she was always in trouble and always on the verge of getting thrown out.
She switched when she was supposed to be practicing the piano. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, she got somebody else to do it for her.
She'd go out and do sports.
That's right, she'd go out and do sports. She was captain of the hockey team. She was quite athletic. And then when she left school, I don't know how old she was when she left school, but she was an apprentice nurse. And nursing was a very rigid thing in England in those days. You wore a uniform, you had to be in residence, you slept in a dormitory with the other apprentice nurses. You had no free time. It was very, very rigid. And she tells some stories about.
Okay, take a little break right there. Okay, go ahead.
I don't remember where it was. Do you? Was it in Blackpool or London or where? I have no idea. But anyway, she was in this program. She wasn't very good at that kind of restrictive stuff. But anyway, it's very, very rigid. You know, they have a matron over them who's like a drill sergeant, and then they have senior nurses. They are always called sisters. And it's very rigid. So one day the matron was talking to a visiting doctor or something, and she said, "Nurse, come here." And my mother came out. "Yes, matron." She said, "Go ask little Billy whatnot about his stool. Ask him if he has a stool." So my mother goes over, shakes this little boy and says, "Where's your stool?" And the kid said, "I don't have one." My mother goes back to the matron. "He doesn't have one." So she wasn't that kind of a mess. Her whole life was like that. Completely like Nicola. And then she discovered that the window to her dormitory slid up, so she got everybody going out for fish and chips and things. At one time it was her turn to go, and she got caught, and she ended up being thrown out of the program. I don't know whether she ever worked after that until she married my father. Do you ever hear about her doing anything else? I don't think she did. She must have gone home. Oh, maybe she just went home. I don't know what she did after that. I don't think she worked after that. But during the Depression, when we were really broke, she used to, I don't know if you know this, she used to make strawberry jam. And she and Joey and I would go out door to door selling this strawberry jam for a while. Didn't last long, but we did that for a while. We were really broke. And
remember how much you charged for it?
I don't remember. I wish I did. No.
Did people buy it?
Yeah, some people bought it. You know.
Did it bother you to do it?
No, I didn't know there was anything to be ashamed of. I just trotted along with it. I never minded anything as long as it was with my mother. I was the most attached kid to their mother you've ever known in your life.
But you didn't get much of her, right?
Didn't get her, although in those days I got more of it than I did after she started work. She was home. But even when she was home, you know, there's certain things, like Monday was wash day. And we had a washroom and a big boiler and a big a rack across the living room where the clothes hung to be dried by this coal fire. On Mondays she was just totally gone. I mean, it was like couldn't have anything. She was totally in the washroom washing, and Tuesday was ironing day and stuff. But I don't remember anything about her cooking meals or anything, but she must have when she was home all that time. And then Aunt Gina and Uncle Leo came, and then it was Uncle Leo who spent time with us all the time. So I don't remember much about spending time with my mother. I do remember her one time saying to me, oh my goodness, Pat, it's raining. I remember thinking, oh my God, she talked to me. She told me something. It was like,
And there was something else she used to do you liked with your knickers.
oh yeah, I always knew she was fond of me. When if I went by, she'd lean over and put her hand under my dress and flick the elastic in the bottom of my knickers. And that, to me, meant she loved me. I thought, oh, she loves me. But if she left the house and didn't kiss me goodbye, and you wonder where Danielle gets it from, I would run screaming down the street, Mommy, Mommy, you didn't kiss me goodbye. I was always worried about her. And I think I told her this the other day. A friend of hers called Ethel, we used to call Auntie Ethel, came by one day and said, come on, Mariah, come out for a drink. And I immediately thought, oh my God, she goes out for a drink, what should I do? I've never seen her have a drink, she doesn't drink. And I went in the bedroom, went down on my knees and begged God not to let her go out for a drink. I was so sure something terrible would happen to her. And I used to pray every night, please let me die before my mother dies. I was the most attached kid to my
There was
mother.
some point where she went off on a vacation and didn't come back for a long time. Was that before you got so attached? Or
No, I was still very attached. She went out to buy a loaf of bread and didn't come back for 2 days. Auntie Barbara was there. She was mad at my father or something. So I was worried about that. And then my father would do things like, she was terrified of mice and frogs and things like that. And if my father found anything of that nature that he knew she was afraid of, he'd tease her and threaten her with it. And one time she ran out of the house and ran across the street and jumped on a bus to get away from it. And I thought, I'll probably never see her again. It was a horrible feeling. I always felt very insecure about her.
Do you know last time that you recorded a story about the wedding and the Catholic priest and all that?
Oh, about my grandmother?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
The one about...
Your grandmother or your mother?
No, this is my mother's mother. In order to marry my father, who was having come from
No,
Ireland.
your grandfather.
My father, rather. Having come from Ireland, he was Catholic, very Catholic. What did I say?
You said father again.
Oh,
Your
my grandfather. She had to go through training with a priest. So the priest came to the house all the time. That took a year, according to what my mother told me. And she had a funny little friend who lived next door called Mrs. Mounsey. And Mrs. Mounsey came by as the priest was leaving. My grandmother said, it's a lot of rubbish, you know. And the priest heard her, so she had to go through the whole thing again. I don't know whether they were married in the meantime and she just had to get right with my grandfather, or whether this was in order for them to get married.
And what was she converting from?
Well, I always assumed Protestantism. But when I was about to marry your father, my mother said it was from Judaism. But I've always suspected that the reason she said that may have had to do with the fact that, remember I had all that problem with Bernard's mother, saying, I don't want to marry someone not Jewish. She may have thought, I'll prevent that problem this time. So I've never been sure about that. It's always been very dubious.
How about the story, I don't know which relative it was, but you were practicing getting on the bus and then got on the bus.
That was the same grandmother. She was quite a character.
On your mother's side.
On my mother's side. She was very heavy and looks a lot like her. A lot like her. I've only seen pictures of her because I don't remember her, but she looks very like her. And she was very self-conscious about being overweight, and she was going to take this bus tour with a friend in Europe. And she was sure that as she was getting on the bus, she'd have trouble and somebody might come behind her and push her. Why she thought that? I don't know. So apparently she set up this elaborate practice station with a stool and everything, and everybody in the family had to take turns helping her not get pushed on the bottom. And she would do awful things, like she was apparently quite a cheapskate, according to my mother, and she had just told my mother to throw a cake in the garbage can. And then she saw somebody coming down to visit, and she thought, oh, for God's sake, go get that cake out of the dustbin. Here comes Mrs. So-and-so. And she would have my mother going out with a little shovel to pick up horse manure for the garden, which my mother hated, of course. And she also would go for a walk, and my mother would have to bring a little shovel in case my grandma saw a plant in somebody else's garden. She'd have my mother dig it up. Right. And my uncle went off to World War I. And my grandmother would say, he was a big favorite of my grandmother's. she would send him care packages with all kinds of chocolate and God knows what in. And my mother would have to take them to post office, and my mother would open them, take out the chocolate, fasten them up again, and then so he never got his chocolate. And when he came home, he would torture her in Big Brother fashion. He'd say things like, "If I were as fat as you are, I'd never set foot outside the house," and he'd keep taunting her. And then he'd sort of make to run away, and she'd chase after him. He'd be going to the golf club, and he'd have her chasing after him all the way to the golf club, and then he'd say, "Thank you very much, just what I wanted, company on the way to the golf." It's horrible.
What was your grandmother's full name?
Mariah Ann Rawson.
R-A-W.
R-A-W-S-O-N. When she was dying of cancer and she was having trouble sleeping, she'd always say, "Go get Mrs. Mounsey from next door, she'll bore me to sleep." Mrs. Mounsey was this little mimsy friend about this size. "Sure, don't like this."
What about her tooth?
Mm?
And the tooth.
Well, oh yes. In those days, dentists would come to the house, and my grandmother needed a tooth removed. She was having lots of toothache. So Mrs. Mounsey was there for moral support. When the dentist came, my grandmother said, "Oh, I can't face it, Mrs. Mounsey. You go ahead and do it." Mrs. Mounsey, "Well, I don't need one." And she said, "Oh, well, go on. We can't have him come here for nothing." She ended up having a tooth out.
Who had a French name? Was that her maiden name?
No, my other grandmother had a French name.
Oh.
Clara Beaumont was her name.
Clara Beaumont.
Yeah, pronounced Beaumont.
Was she from France?
She was from France, according to my other cousin Anne. Her family her brothers, I think it was, ran a dance studio of some kind in Paris. But she didn't have any trace of a French accent. I have no idea how old she was when she came over. She had this problem, I was saying.
But that was more English, right?
Well, I've never heard anybody else do that except her.
Oh.
I don't know.
Yes.
Oh, and the other story about my grandmother. When Joey was born, apparently it was the worst storm in Blackpool that there's ever been. My mother, she was born at home in my grandmother's house. And it was really fierce, big winds and everything. So the minute the baby's born, my grandmother wraps her up in a great big blanket, puts her hat and coat on, and sits there holding the baby. And my mother said, "What are you all dressed up about?" She went, "I'm going to have to get this baby out of here. It's terrible." So I said, "Well, what about me?" She said, "I can't carry you." She was terrible.
Who was it that was laid up in your house and it's the pot boy that...
Oh, that was her husband, the one who went to bed to keep her company. That was my mother's father. And every time he came in the house, I'd creep in and he'd say, Patwood, fetch me some matches." And then I'd go up and say, "Well, I think I fancy a little bit of lunch now." I was about, the war started when I was 9. I was at most 9 or 10. And I'd say, "Oh, what do you want for lunch, Papa?" And he'd say, "Oh, I don't know, anything would do me. A little bit of poached salmon would be nice with some green peas or something."
Was he joking or serious?
No, he was unrealistic. And then when he lived at Uncle Arthur's house, when Michael was a baby, he heard that Michael, as a little baby, had a bunch of Easter eggs for Easter. He said, "Send him up here with his Easter eggs. I'd like to look at them." And Michael ended up crying because Grandpa had eaten all his Easter eggs.
Oh.
And he was the one who, when he was dying, would lie there with the sheet over his head. And the nuns would say to him, "What are you doing, Michael? Are you dead?" And he'd say, "Not yet."
And what was wrong with her? Why was she in bed that he had to keep her company?
She had cancer, supposedly of the liver, but I don't know if it originated in the liver or if it was somewhere else. She was only in her 50s. She died young. So she'd say, "If only I could see these children raised." And Joey and I were 2 and 6 months old.
What do you remember eating when you were a little girl?
Beans on toast, fried eggs and chips, French fries.
Did you tell about the chips, the oil on the...
Oh yeah, there was a permanent pan of oil on the stove, deep, and a net basket thing that came up and cut up potatoes, put them in. It was a constant frying noise. We'd eat fried egg and chips up the yin-yang every Saturday.
Did you go on top of the chips?
Not in the pan, no, we'd fry them
On
separately.
the plate you put the chips and the eggs?
Yeah, and the eggs. And Saturdays, Joey and I would go down to a little store and buy meat and potato pies. That was always Saturday's meal. And then lunchtime, there was always either roast lamb, roast pork, or roast beef. And
This is when you were doing well, I take it.
this one, well, as soon as the war came, we were rich.
Oh.
I never knew when I was a kid whether we were rich or poor, because we lived in this awful little house with 1 million people, and it was all crumbling, and nobody ever bought new furniture for it. Well, my mother bought new furniture for it once, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. But my mother would get a taxi in the morning and keep it all day if she was on a day off, if she was off. You know, she didn't have a whole day off very often, but if she did, she'd have a taxi like a private car going everywhere. Whether we'd always eat out in restaurants, we were always having tea out.
You ate at a restaurant every day at school, didn't you?
Yeah, I ate lunch in a restaurant every day for school. My mother would say, we don't want to eat those funny school lunches, so she'd pay for me to go to a restaurant.
And what would you eat there?
Shepherd's pie or beans on toast.
And what
Usually shepherd's
about
pie.
the waitresses? Didn't they like
The waitress would love me though. I was like their baby, and I had this school scarf, and they'd all say, it's my turn to do a scarf, and they'd say, all right, get ready, and they'd swing my scarf around my neck and tuck me up and turn my collar up, and they were all very, very sweet, and it was nice. I liked it. But it was, my mother shouldn't have done that, because it meant I didn't play sports or involve myself in anything at school. I just set off on the bus and went to Robinson's for lunch. That was with my book, of course.
What would you eat for breakfast?
For breakfast, either, when I was really young, porridge, which is, you know, oatmeal, and toast. And when I got older, I think just toast. Maybe, I can't remember if I ate cereal or not. Toast, I think. It's toast. And tea, we always drank tea all the time.
Do you remember the first time you ate any particular thing that now seems very common? Fruit or...
I do remember that there was one point during the war when oranges suddenly became available a little bit, not much, but you know, there were few and far between, but you'd get an occasional orange. And Auntie Barbara said, okay, you can choose. Every day you can have either an apple or an orange. Usually I have, and I always had an orange, and Joey always had an apple. And I can remember that was very exciting. And I can remember the big excitement was going to look at a grocery store window that had a decal of Fife's bananas in a big bunch. And we'd go on the stand and look at it like, oh, what could you give for a banana? Just would have given anything for a banana. And there was a girl down the street called Jean Fidian who had one of the big Cadbury's chocolate bars that she'd got before the war. She never opened it. We used to go on expeditions in the neighbourhood, knock on her door. Can Jean come out to play? And when she came out, we'd say, come and look at your chocolate bar. And we always fervently hoped that she'd say, why don't we just open it and eat it? She never did, but she'd bring it out. Yeah, look at it. And we'd all look at it. Oh. Never did she open it, ever. So that's a big thrill. And I do remember that my mother would get irritated with me because every time she took me out to a restaurant, I'd have beans on toast or shepherd's pie, and that's all. And I always had a meringue for dessert. What?
A picky eater.
A picky eater, yeah. Right, imagine. So that was always my favourite food. And I remember the big thrill of my life was going out to tea with my mother. She'd say sometimes, come and meet me at Robinson's or come and meet me at Booth's Cafe or something. So I'd show up and she'd always have friends with her, and we always knew, Joey or I, that we weren't supposed to join in the conversation. But we'd sit there and everybody'd talk as if we weren't there. You know, the other friends would say, hello, how are you? And then we'd be ignored, and we'd learn all kinds of stuff you wouldn't believe, because the behaviours didn't exist. So they'd be telling these scandalous stories about each other. That's when I heard one of I think it was Florence Hill or somebody telling somebody else that my mother used to do this thing. My mother was like a sort of, she was almost like a matron with the people who worked for her in this hotel. And most of them were kind of a bit low-life barmaidy types, you know, but good-hearted, almost like good-hearted prostitutes, except they were barmaids. My mother would take them in hand and make them save their money and do all this kind of. She'd say, come on, give me £5, you're spending too much money, and I'll have it all neatly catalogued for them and stuff. And apparently Florence Hill was telling someone that she had this one waitress who was a big blonde with huge boobs. My mother said to her, come on, Flo, you're all tits and tall, get on with it. She's very prudish in some way. Well, do you remember that about her? Sometimes she'd be prudish, and sometimes she'd say these ghastly things.
Did she ever